What is the darkest secret you've discovered about someone that made you instantly end your relationship with them? A former friend of mine turned out to be not only on the run from ICE. I found out he was an illegal immigrant after the fact, but also had a very weird family dynamic. His wife always seemed a bit scared of him, very yes dear all the time, which I assumed was just a cultural 1950s type thing. His kids were also fearful, with lots of yes father and sir. I chalked it up to a strict cultural upbringing. The kicker was when his teenage niece came to live with them after some issues with her parents. She was more defiant, challenging his authority. He would often jokingly tell her, "Don't make me get the belt," and she would back down. Everyone laughed it off like it was some inside joke. The final, most disturbing moment for me came one night when we were watching a movie and having a few beers. He looked at his wife and asked, "So, it's Friday night, want to do it tonight?" She responded with a dismissive ladies' problem answer. I was already uncomfortable. Then he looked at his niece and asked the same question. I expected the usual laugh, but instead, she looked scared and said, "Do I really have a choice?" I waited 10 minutes, faked a stomach problem, and left immediately. I avoided them and never saw any of them again. About 4 months later, I read in the paper that the niece had run away about a week after that incident, and he had been arrested and was being deported. I can only assume she ran away and reported him. Story 2, I was having some wine with a female friend, and she kept trying to get me to go up to her room. Eventually, she succeeded. While she talked about random stuff, she would sit in a chair, play with her feet, and encourage me to get comfortable. I started to feel uneasy, and then I noticed the webcam she was sitting in front of. She was camming and trying to include me in her show without my knowledge or consent. I got the F out of there immediately and blocked her number. Story 3. About 6 years ago, I lived with a roommate in a really nice apartment. He didn't seem like a bad guy. He was friendly and never really judged anyone. There were a few things that seemed a little off, though. Whenever my girlfriend, now ex, came over, he would fidget or seem anxious. And whenever I had girls over in general, he wouldn't talk to them much or make eye contact. One day, my girlfriend and I invited her friend coworker and my roommate to a jazz club. Throughout the night, I noticed her friend and my roommate giving each other weird looks. At one point, my roommate got up to get something from his car, and my ex's friend gave us a stern look and said, "Never, ever invite me to anything if he's tagging along." I was a little confused, so while my roommate was at work, I snooped through his desk drawers. I found dozens of apology letters, addressed to my ex's friend Aaron. I don't remember exactly what they said, but they were along the lines of, "Please forgive me. What I did was horrible, and I've served the time for it." So I asked Aaron what had happened. Before I became his roommate, she and he had been really good friends until he essayed her twice. He had been in prison for about 4 or 5 years. I moved out as soon as I could. Story 4. I was talking to this woman about a week ago. We're from the same area and both lesbian, so I asked if she knew any good gay clubs where you can be new without issues and, more importantly, feel safe, like not worrying about having something slipped into your drink. She responded, "Oh yeah, I used to do that, putting stuff in other girls' drinks. Needless to say, I will not be going anywhere with her." Story 5. I dated a guy who was fun but a little odd in a cute way. In the beginning, we were pretty honest with each other. He told me about a bang buddy he had, but once our relationship became official, he said he had ended things with her. Fast forward, and I started getting weird yeast infections, and then he developed a strange rash. It turned out we were both infected. It was especially confusing because I kept getting infections even after treatment, so I assumed we were passing it back and forth. Meanwhile, weird things were happening with his phone. He would get blank messages from unsaved numbers. Eventually, I discovered he had been cheating on me with that former bang buddy the whole time. I broke up with him, but then I found out he was also sleeping with other men through Craigslist. He would go out of town to meet them. When I confronted him about it during our relationship, he claimed he had experimented before, but was too embarrassed to come out as bi or gay. I hear he's still being shady and still talking to that bang buddy. Now he has a pregnant girlfriend. And part of me wants to warn her, but another part of me doesn't. Either way, I went and got checked right away after finding out about his online activities. Story 6. My uncle is a PDF file. I say uncle because he never actually married my aunt. He was just a guy living with her for several years. They caught that sick jerk trading kitty corn on the internet. One of the guys he traded with was a cop. When they raided the house, they found dozens of removable drives with over 26,000 images. God knows if he had even more hidden on more drives that the cops never found. When they caught him, he attempted to use the I didn't know they were on my computer. Someone must have downloaded them onto my computer without my knowledge. Defense. Which is friggin' stupid because he was on dial-up internet at the time. What's sickening is that he only got 2 years probation, didn't have to register as an offender, and only had a condition that he wasn't allowed to be around anyone under 18 without adult supervision for 10 years. I no longer refer to him as my uncle. I just refer to him as the PDF file. What's even more sickening is that people actually get angry at me for calling him that. He's family, they say, and I say no, he is not family. The most disgusting part, even before Grandma died, they still let that sick man come to family events and even be alone with children. Story 7. This guy was a former player for the San Diego Chargers, and we had mutual friends, so he added me on Instagram. He was trying to take me on a date. And naturally, I Googled him first. It turned out he had been kicked off the team for a variety of reasons. The most shocking being that he burned his mattress and half of his apartment complex because he claimed Jesus told him to do it. I told him straight up that I had Googled him and that I wasn't going on a date. Story 8. My girlfriend's father was arrested after it came to light that he had been assaying her for several years and had gotten her pregnant. The child I believed to be her brother was actually her 18-month-old son. Being 17, I didn't know how to cope with the situation, so I ended the relationship. Story 9. One of the guys I hooked up with back in college was mellow, but not someone I wanted to go back to. He was kinda sloppy. Naturally, after the initial hookup, I ignored him and hardly responded to his texts, but he kept sending snaps, asking me to go out with him, saying he didn't want to hook up, just go on a date. I was seeing someone at the time, so I obviously declined. For some reason, he wouldn't take the hint. He started saying things like, "You never hang out with me, you're always out with other people." At one point, I just gave in. We had a hardware class together, so I stuck around for that. This guy was standing right in front of me while I was talking to another girl about some of our programs, and he literally swung a water bottle at my head, hitting the side of it. No blood, but enough to freak me out. I've got thick skin, thanks Dad. I said, "Dude, what's wrong with you?" and ignored him for the rest of class. We run in similar circles, so running into him was inevitable. A few days later, my friends and I were sitting at a cafe, passing around cigarettes and just laughing. He was sitting to my left, and the seat right next to me was empty. Out of nowhere, he put his arm around my shoulder, which was fine, just stretching out, nothing unnatural. Then he proceeded to stroke my thigh, which was strictly off limits. It made me really uncomfortable, so I smacked his hand away. I didn't say anything to him. I just left with some friends to go to class. About a week later, we were both at a party, but I wasn't really into it. I ended up sitting alone on a flight of stairs by a pool, which was relatively empty. Minutes later, distracted by my phone, I noticed him coming. This guy had literally quit the party and followed me out, even though he's usually the one fooling around inside with a bunch of girls. He sat by me and started talking about random stuff, which was fine at first. Then his hands started getting grabby, holding my hand, placing it on my shoulder. Then he actually put pressure on my neck. We were far away from the party, so even if I screamed, no one would have helped. Knowing this guy, I pushed him away. He's easily 70 to 80 pounds heavier than me, and told him I wasn't interested. He responded in a desperate voice saying, "Come on, just one kiss, baby," and I edged away. He couldn't take no for an answer, and shoved me around, but I managed to make it back to the party. He made it back too, had to leave a bit early and came to talk to me. What he said was, "I really, really want to go out with you again, and I'm so sorry I hit you in class the other day," which he clearly didn't. "And for getting physically aggressive, I just really want to try it out with you, and I feel like hurting you in an intimate way." It baffles me how this guy, just 18, thought it was okay to stalk girls and act out his fantasies. Consent still matters, right? He sounded genuinely disturbed at the time. Lesson learned, don't hook up anymore, at least not with people who are clearly unstable. Story 10. I dated this guy for about 5 months. It was a complete roller coaster, and I still don't know why I stuck around as long as I did, but at least I got some good stories out of it. He told me he had gotten a job at a pizza shop. For about a week, he had all these stories about his days at work. Right after starting, he claimed he'd twisted his ankle badly enough to need crutches, and told me this whole story about how his boss gave him a rolling computer chair so he could scoot around and still work while resting it. Later, I found out it was all made up. He had lied about the job entirely and invented all those work stories. I let it go. There were also multiple times during the relationship when people I had never met somehow got my number and started calling and texting me, threatening me because he owed them money. I let that slide too. There was one time we went out to dinner at Pizza Hut, and he gave our waitress a really hard time because her shirt wasn't tucked in. He claimed to be a former Pizza Hut manager and said she wasn't up to the Pizza Hut standard of excellence. I was so humiliated by his behavior that I was practically in tears. I moved past it. Another morning, I told him I'd had a scary dream about the apocalypse the night before. His response was, "I thought you didn't believe in God. How could you be scared of a dream about the apocalypse?" Then he tried to give me a lesson on the book of Revelation. I shrugged that off too. The final nail in the coffin was when I found a syringe in my car. He had been using drugs the entire time we were dating, and somehow managed to keep it a secret from me while hiding evidence in my car. That was it. I was done. I had tried breaking up with him twice before, and each time he threatened to hurt himself. This time was no different. I said, "Okay, go ahead and do it then." And I never spoke to him again. Story 11. I had a good friend with a really nice husband. One day she called me to confess that she had been having an affair at home while her husband was at work, but said she was calling it off. I started avoiding her and didn't reply to her texts because I don't condone cheating. A few months later, she posted on Facebook that she was pregnant. Big news, since she and her husband had been trying for years, and she had already miscarried once. I ran into her at the grocery store, small town life, and she casually told me it wasn't her husband's baby. The kicker? She and her husband are white, and the boyfriend is black. She ended up having a miscarriage and to this day posts pictures on Facebook of herself, her husband, her boyfriend, and his wife all hanging out together. I can't be friends with someone who thinks that's okay behavior. Story 12. There was this God-fearing Christian family who lived about 2 hours from the city. My wife had agreed to babysit their children while I drove every day to her nursing job. It was a huge house on a hill. Right at the entrance was a glass case with a light from the bottom, displaying her wedding dress on a mannequin. It struck me as both pretentious and creepy. The couple were friendly, outgoing, and successful, but for some reason, I didn't like them at all, and my wife's expression said the same. The children were out-of-control little hellions. They loved throwing, kicking, and lashing out violently, especially at the family cat, who shook in fear, looking as if it had been terrorized its whole life. One little girl whispered, "Mommy said don't tell them what happened to the other cats." I quietly asked her to elaborate, and she added, "We bury them in the backyard." The father told me that their dog, a massive animal, nearly 100 pounds, had been given as an unwanted birthday gift and had been leashed to the barn ever since, never played with or allowed to run free. So I played with the dog until it was time to leave. When the father came out to leash him, the dog jumped onto the hood of my car, then bolted to the driver's side window, crawled into the back seat, as if to say, Please take me with you." We quickly debated it, feeling terrible about handing him back to his captors, but living in an apartment made it impossible at the time. We refused the job and never went back. But it was so tempting to drive away with him. It was such a horribly unfair life. Watching from the side of the barn, as the family who's supposed to be your packmates goes about their lives every day without you, until it's time to grow old and die. Even most of the slaves in the South were kept with their families, or at least weren't left completely alone. Story 13. She lied to me about being a doctor. We even met for lunch during one of her breaks, and she showed up in scrubs. Who the hell does something like that? Story 14. I worked with this guy for a little over a year. We weren't close friends, but we got along. The day he started, one of my coworkers mentioned she'd heard he had been in prison because he had accidentally offed a child. I was hesitant about getting close, but over time we became friends, and I figured he had served his time for an accident. A few months later, I was drinking at home with some friends and decided to Google his name. It was unusual, so it was easy to find. That's when I discovered the truth. It wasn't an accident. He had been physically aggressive and ignored a little boy left in his care for pooping in the bathtub, then hid the body and reported the child missing 2 months later. He pled guilty to second-degree murder and got 13 years. After he got out, he got a job with me. It was extremely difficult being around him. I tried to distance myself, but he still talked to me often. Every time I saw him after that, I couldn't stop thinking about that poor kid he had hurt. Story 15. My mom used to date this guy I absolutely adored. He was always very kind to me and my sisters, buying us gifts and taking us to amusement parks and things like that. He was also very physically affectionate with us, putting us on his lap and making us give him kisses. I was about 6 at the time, and my sisters were 4 and 9. One weekend, he took us all to his remote cabin in the woods for a little vacation. The room my sisters and I stayed in was filled with creepy antique dolls, and we were strictly told not to touch or move any of them. There was also a dresser full of white, old-fashioned nightgowns, the kind a doll might wear. It was deeply unsettling. There was a wooden box on a bookshelf in the living room that we were not allowed to open. So, of course, as soon as he and my mom went out onto the deck to drink, we We opened it. Inside were photos of girls dressed in those same nightgowns. Most of the pictures were normal, but there was something profoundly disturbing about them. Then we saw inappropriate pictures of the girls. The photos had been taken in the room where my sisters and I were staying. My blood ran cold, and I don't think I've been the same since. We could not get my mom away from this man long enough to tell her what was wrong. That night, my older sister shoved a dresser in front of the door, so he could not enter the room while we slept. The next day, we told my mom what had happened and left in a hurry, with her making some excuse about a sick friend. He began showing up outside our house, begging my mom to take him back and threatening her, so she obtained a restraining order against him. Many years later, I found out that he had been arrested as part of a corn ring. Even scarier was that he had spent many years working as a school counselor in an elementary school. When I have kids, I will be so careful about who is allowed to be around them. Also, forever grateful to my mom for protecting us above anything else. Story 16. A friend of mine started dating a guy she'd been on and off with for several years. He and I went to college together and were pretty good friends. They dated for 3 months, and then he cheated on her the day before her birthday. When she confronted him, he didn't even deny it. The next morning, her birthday, he left a letter on her windshield around 5 a.m. In it, he said he cheated because she was a high-maintenance bitch. Also in the envelope was her mother's wedding ring, which he had taken to get resized while supposedly picking out an engagement ring. 1000% jerk move. I never talked to him again. I took her to coffee that morning when she called me crying. 2 months later, we started dating, got married a year after that, and have now been happily married for almost 7 years. Screw that guy, but definitely a happy ending. Story 17. Our friendship was already on its way out, but everything ended when I found out my friend had cheated on their sweet, loving, long-distance partner with the roommate they still slept next to and cuddled with all the time. That was the moment I knew the friendship was beyond repair. What made it worse was that we had reconnected right after my fiancé left me and I moved back into my parents' house when I was having a really bad time. We bonded over how hard things had been for both of us. Except they conveniently left out the whole "I'm cheating on my partner" part. The fact that they treated their guilt over cheating as equal to my grief over losing my first serious relationship made me feel sick to my stomach. I don't think I could have looked them in the eye after that. I don't know, cheating is just something I can't deal with. If you're willing to betray the person you're closest to, what are you willing to do to me someday? What lines would you cross? I don't have time for that. Story 18. My brother-in-law's parents got divorced when he was a kid, and he chose to live with his aunt and grandma instead. He later dated and married my sister, and they had a cute kid. We live in Puerto Rico, where family celebrations and gatherings are big. Greeting people is important here. It's considered rude to arrive somewhere, or have someone arrive, without acknowledging anyone, especially if you know them. This usually means a kiss on the cheek or a handshake, maybe just a nod if you're strangers. I noticed that his parents completely ignored each other. Not in the typical divorced and awkward way where they try not to talk. They didn't greet, say hi, or even make eye contact. It was like they didn't exist to each other. I figured it wasn't my business and forgot about it. Then one day, I was in the car with my parents, and they were gossiping about how my brother-in-law's grandma was furious at his dad. Let's call him the dad. I asked why, and my parents told me that the dad had been abusive to my brother-in-law's mom. Let's call her the mom. He would beat her so badly that she would lose consciousness and bleed all over the floor. And when she came to, he would yell at her to clean it up. He also cheated on her, stole from stores and from her, essayed her, and threatened to take her kids away. Horrible stuff. Then his lover started calling the mom. She would mock her for being abused, call her names, threaten her, and insult her kids. On top of that, she was a kleptomaniac and used drugs. That was the final straw, and they got divorced. Apparently, it was a very ugly affair. But it was over. I was shocked. This guy acted super friendly toward everyone, and my family often greeted him and his lover, who later got married, and even had conversations with them at gatherings, as if nothing had happened. To make it worse, my sister and her kid were staying with my brother-in-law at the dad's house, and they would leave my precious nephew there, so Grandpa could babysit him. I mean, come on. My dad is 10,000 times better than that D-bag. Still, my family believes in diplomacy, so I have to greet them. Now, all I can manage is a stony-faced handshake if I have to touch them at all, and I feel like jerking my hand away in disgust the whole time. I strongly believe my parents are good people, but when I see them making conversation with those a-holes, I can't help feeling disappointed. Maybe I'm acting immature. All of this happened more than a decade ago, minus the klepto tendencies apparently. But every time they smile at me, All I can think is, don't smile at me, you D-bag. I hate people like you. Story 19. I was a relatively young manager at a record store. Most of the employees were high school or college-age kids, with a few older ones who didn't have the skills or drive to move up. The bookkeeper was an older woman who had gotten out of an abusive relationship and had a teenage son. I thought I had a good relationship with her. She once called me to meet outside of work to discuss some personal issues. It turned out she was sleeping with the assistant manager, who was barely older than her son. I had no idea. She told me the story in detail, and on top of that, they were all sharing an apartment. Her son, and this young man. That was one of many reasons I noped out of that job. She tried calling me once after that, but I claimed I was too busy to talk and would call her back. I never did. Story 20. The secret I discovered about her was that she had absolutely no compassion or empathy for others. She got engaged to a guy she'd been on and off with for ages, already a questionable decision, but then started going on dates with another guy she'd known for maybe a few hours, even going to each other's houses for dinner. She saw no problem with it. She also started pressuring her fiancé about giving the ring back, claiming he needed to fix himself because she couldn't deal with him being depressed or whatever. One day, she told me a story about how she, her fiancé, and the new guy were all playing some online game. Diablo, I think. She casually described how she and the new guy started flirting in front of the fiancé. Naturally, the fiancé was upset and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" She went on and on about how irritated she was with him, as if he were in the wrong for reacting. Frigging Jesus. Strike one. A while later, she started announcing to me and a couple of others we shared an office with all the messages her fiancé was sending her. They were now on the outs, and she was stringing him along, making it as torturous as possible. He was seriously depressed, and she was reading his messages out loud in the office for all of us to hear. We were sitting there, mortified, and she had no concept of what she was doing. She went on about how annoying it was to have someone pouring their misery out to her, saying it wasn't her responsibility how he felt. Well, yes, it is. You frigging caused it. Strike two. Then, in one of her rare moments where she seemed human, we were talking, and for some reason, she ended up telling me why her fiancé was depressed, which I won't repeat. I opened up to her about something deeply personal. I once had a girlfriend who told me she'd been essayed as a child. I hadn't ever said that out loud to anyone, and had buried a lot of the associated feelings. In the days that followed, I ended up feeling pretty low myself. At first she seemed supportive, but eventually she told me I was messed up and that she couldn't cope with it. This was someone I used to hang out with daily for years. I'm still furious at her for that level of apathy and outright betrayal of basic human decency, but only because of how close I thought we were. The fact that it was such a huge loss to me makes me even angrier that she broke it. From what I can tell, she lost a lot of friends because of how she acted during that saga, and picked up a bunch of new ones. I don't know where she is now, but the last time we encountered each other, we pretended the other didn't exist. Not on speaking terms. Story 21, I went on a first date with a guy I'd been talking to online for a couple of weeks. The date was going really well until he told me he wanted to be upfront and said he had genital herpes from his ex. I didn't immediately write him off. It was shocking, but he seemed like a nice guy, so I decided to at least see where things went emotionally. But then, about an hour later, he started telling me in graphic detail how he met a millionaire oil heiress while he was in the army and acted out some crazy essay fantasy with her. He was laughing the whole time and practically crying when he said he was shocked she wouldn't do it in the back door after he had hurt her physically. Yeah, no, goodbye. Story 22. One of the girls in our circle had been sleeping with her best friend's husband, my really close friend, and she's also the godmother of their child. She had been involved with him throughout the entirety of the relationship, dating, engagement, marriage, and pregnancy. Yes, I'm still somewhat friends with the husband, but only at the request of my friend, who asked me to support them in trying to reconcile. The real reason I cut ties with the girl sleeping around, though, was that she was also messing with another friend's fiancé, and she was set to be a bridesmaid at their wedding. It showed me she had no care for other people's relationships. I approached her about it, and she got defensive, somehow turning it around on me. Everyone has flaws, but to deny and continue that behavior is not okay in my book. Story 23, I was really close friends with a girl. One day she told me she was going to England with her boyfriend. They left and came back 6 months later. During that time, they had locked a brother and sister cat, neither of them fixed, in a room the entire time. They ended up having several litters of inbred kittens, which became feral. Instead of trying to find them homes or taking them to a shelter, they took them down to a stream and drowned them all. She told me this laughing over dinner. I called her a frigging psycho, got up and left. I never saw her again. I have never been, and have never since been, so disgusted in my life. Story 24. I worked with a guy for about a year. He seemed like a really cool person, and we got on pretty well. He used to tell some strange stories. One I remember involved dressing as a cop and carrying a fake hand grenade, but I figured he was just a bit of a bullshitter. One day he invited me to his place, and I saw a completely different side of him. He had framed pictures of Hitler and SS guards on the walls around his bed. Then he started telling me the Holocaust was all lies meant to make Germans look bad, before pulling out photos of the Holocaust and talking about how great they were. I tried to talk to him rationally, but that moment was the end of our friendship. About 2 years later, a mutual friend was visiting him and his new girlfriend. They got him drunk and stoned and tried to torture him to death. He managed to escape by jumping through a bay window and running to the neighbors. He ended up with a collapsed lung and numerous burns. Story 25. A new guy started at our restaurant. I hadn't been introduced to him, but from a distance I thought he was pretty cute. After a couple of days, someone decided to Google him and found he'd been charged with animal cruelty, theft, and domestic violence, and was also connected to the disappearance of a girl. He was never convicted due to insufficient evidence, and her body was never found. He was fired shortly after that came to light. I just saw him in the news again, now connected to another missing girl. Again, no body, so no murder charge as of yet. A girl who still worked at the restaurant had started a relationship with him during his short time there, and had actually talked to him the night the most recent girl disappeared, and for most of the next day. She defended him vehemently and still does. They are two people I refuse to ever interact with. Story 26. I was hanging out with a friend after work one day when I got a call from my girlfriend. She was crying and hysterical, telling me I had to come to her house immediately. She said she had just come back from a routine checkup at the doctor and had been told she had diabetes. Thinking this was serious, I rushed over. When I got there, she was acting like nothing had happened and everything was perfectly fine. I was completely confused. A week later, she told me, laughing, "Oh yeah, I drank a Coke right before having my blood drawn, so that probably messed up the test." Not long after that, I found out she had faked a ton of illnesses growing up just to get what she wanted in the moment. I broke it off later that week. Story 27. When I was stationed in Arizona, my next door neighbor and I got along really well. We even kept in touch for years after leaving the army. One day, I called to see how things were going, and casually he told me that his wife had been killed in their driveway by an unknown assailant. He hadn't heard anything because he was in the shower, which is where the cops found him. He said they considered him a suspect, but that he expected to be cleared, claiming there was no evidence. Not no evidence showing I did it, just no evidence at all. I never called him again, and for whatever reason, he never called me either. I suspect it's because he doesn't have my number in prison. Story 28. This probably doesn't count as a darkest secret, but I'll share it anyway. I used to be friends with a guy named Scott. We were always hanging out and even best friends for a while. The problem was, Scott didn't have a steady job or a car, so I was always the one driving and paying for food, drinks, etc. He would hit me up like, "Hey dude, wanna go watch football at Chili's?" And I'd always say, "Sure, I'll come pick you up." Then, when the check came, he'd just look at me and say, "Thanks, man." I'm like, "Wait, what? You're not gonna chip in? You didn't have any money in the first place, so you hit me up to go to Chili's, didn't mention you weren't paying, ordered 4 beers, wings, and fries, and then just give me a pat on the back with a thanks, man? No. Later, dude. Story 29. When I was 8, I had a friend from daycare who used to lie all the time to her parents. She was the youngest and the only child her parents had. Together, she had older half-siblings, so she was the baby and got away with a lot. I'd sometimes go over to her house, and she'd tell me it was okay to eat ice cream or walk to the park. But then when her mom asked about it, she'd lie and say we hadn't. The final straw was when she blamed me for breaking her dad's rowing machine. I called my mom to pick me up early. Also, her neighbor had kittens, and she got one. During our visit, she treated this tiny, maybe month-old kitten like a toy, carrying it around in a cardboard box. Her parents didn't stop her, and I felt really bad for it. So when she got bored, I just let it nap on my chest for an hour while I watched TV with her parents. Story 30. The woman who cut my hair started talking about psychopaths and sociopaths and how they seemed to gravitate toward her. She said she'd been in classes with some famous murderer. I recognized the name at the time, but have since forgotten who it was. Then she began asking me all sorts of strange questions, almost like she was trying to get me to admit that I was like them. I stayed polite, let her finish the haircut, and never went back. Story 31. I was friends with her for over 15 years. She struggled with drug addiction, but I still tried to support her. Things weren't great between us because of her addiction. She stole from us, lied, and caused various other problems. Our friendship finally ended when I was told by an eyewitness that she hadn't actually lost her V-card to SA. She had lied about it to make herself look like she hadn't been promiscuous. The poor guy she accused had been beaten so badly over it that he still has seizures. Hearing this made me realize she had always been selfish, even long before her addiction. I blocked her on all forms of communication and haven't looked back. Story 32. I met this guy through a work function several years ago and found myself kind of interested in him. After talking for about a week, we decided to meet up for drinks since we both had plans that night. That afternoon, I decided to Google him, like you do, and found out he had recently been arrested for sleeping with one of his students. I never brought it up and ended up flaking on him, but I still ran into him at the bar later that night. He then disclosed that he was still married. I cut it off almost immediately. Unfortunately, I still run into him every now and then. As far as I know, he was convicted but never spent a day in jail. Story 33. An ex-friend of mine claimed she had been essayed as a teenager and accused her sister's young husband as the culprit. She also accused a high school teacher of essay. Fast forward several years. She was about to get married, and her fiancé received an anonymous letter warning him not to go through with it, claiming she was manipulative and a liar. He ignored it, especially after she told him it was from her sister, who was married to the man she had accused. A few years later, she left her husband and ran off with another former high school teacher. He was 20 years older than her, and his wife, the one who had taken her in after the alleged abuse and helped her, even working extra to support her college classes, was completely betrayed. That was the first red flag that maybe what she had been saying wasn't true. Later, her brother found letters she had written to one of the men she accused of essay, professing how much she loved him and claiming she was better for him than his wife. When confronted with the letters, she just smiled and said it was a long time ago, neither denying them nor explaining. The letters, in her handwriting, made it clear she was the instigator. Most likely when she didn't get what she wanted or they broke up, she accused them of essay and played the victim. Since she was a teenager, people believed her. I stopped being her friend after she left with the former teacher. Afterwards, my husband confessed that there were plenty of times she had made advances toward him or done inappropriate things when I wasn't around, like taking a shower at our house and accidentally leaving the bathroom door open. Last I heard, she is on husband number 4. She has and continues to wreck many people's lives. To this day, I cannot get over the loss, the hate, or the betrayal from the wife who did nothing but try to help, or from her first husband, who just kept murmuring. I should have listened to that note. Story 34. My dad's mother told him she didn't love or want him when he was 5. She tried to commit self-harm and take the kids with her twice while he was growing up, and he had to talk her down. Those aren't even the worst things she's done. She's manipulative, abusive, and a complete narcissist. My dad carries the burden of making sure she has somewhere to live in her old age because her other son is a codependent drug addict and none of her siblings want anything to do with her. I refuse to see or speak to her ever again, and she will never meet her great-grandson. Story 35. The last person I dated turned out to be a neo-Nazi. We'd known each other for a couple of years by that point, so I had plenty of time to notice, but I still can't figure out how I missed it. What baffles me the most is that he knew I have Ashkenazi and Romani heritage, and he never said a single negative thing about it. I even remember a conversation where he said he found my background interesting. I was so stunned when I found out that it took me a couple of weeks just to get over the initial shock. Once I calmed down, I ended it immediately. Even though he turned out to be a total scumbag, he had been one of my best friends, and getting over all of that took a long time. Story 36. This is actually really recent. In my hometown, there have been these clown sightings. At first, it was lighthearted. People standing in bushes or at tree lines, getting their pictures taken, then running off. Just people messing around and being stupid. But now it's escalated. They're peeking into school windows, carrying heavy firearms, chasing people, and hanging around parking lots watching folks, right near where I work. One of my buddies told me he was involved in that shit. I probably should report him to the police, but instead I've completely cut him off. I don't want to be anywhere near that. Story 37. In the early 2000s, I worked at a pizza place with a delivery driver who was a defrocked priest. He was super friendly and had a lot of stereotypical gay mannerisms, so the running joke was that the church had kicked him out for e-saying. I made an effort to be nice to him, because I thought it was unfair that just for being gay, everyone assumed he was a PDF file. Long story short, he actually was a PDF file. Or at least an alleged PDF file. Somebody Googled it and found a newspaper article about his arrest and the allegations. I remember saying to a coworker that if we were in prison instead of a pizza place, one of us would have to off the guy. After I found out I tried my best to avoid the guy. He quit not too long after that. Turned out he came down with tongue cancer. When I heard that, it didn't make me happy, but it didn't make me unhappy either. Story 38. I wasn't in a romantic relationship with him, just somewhat friendly. We had mutual friends, and he was about 15 years older than me. I was in my early 20s. That said, he did send me flowers once on my birthday to show he was interested, but he was perfectly fine with me not feeling the same. It never came up again, and never made things awkward when we interacted. I found out later that he was a convicted PDF file, and I never spoke to him again. I have a young daughter, and it completely creeped me out and made me really angry. A couple of years later, I ran into him, and he was dating a girl the same age as his daughter. It turned out they had met because his daughter and his now girlfriend were friends. Story 39. There was one kid on my academic team in high school whose mom attended every single match, except when we played a school from a few counties over. She even left the building when this school faced us in the finals. I thought it was pretty strange, so I mentioned it to the kid's girlfriend, who revealed that she was not legally allowed to be in the auditorium when we played them. It turned out she used to teach at that school and had been fired for sending death threats to boys who were better at baseball than her other son. These were actual bomb threats. She got caught because she had written them on her classroom computer. She went to county jail for a few years and is now banned from teaching or participating in school functions in that county. Story 40. I had a close friend confide in me that he was planning to shoot up a grocery store. He also shared some of his religious experiences, which sounded to me like hallucinations and delusions. I told my mom, and she flipped out, which led to me having to talk to the police. When they questioned him, he denied everything and turned on me. He threatened me for weeks, and even showed up at my work one night after I had left, demanding that my coworker tell him where I was, one hand in his hoodie pocket with a bulge that looked like a gun. The police kept an eye on my house and workplace for about a month until the harassment stopped. He was a former addict, and I had only renewed our 5-year friendship because he seemed to have straightened out his life and become more religious. I later found out he had relapsed during this time, which probably explains why he went completely off the rails. Last I heard, he was still using hard drugs and had moved back in with his dad. He had been a good friend for a long time, and we shared a lot of great experiences. It makes me sad to think about how things turned out. Story 41. I didn't have a relationship with him, but my professor always had some pretty disturbing stories that made me hesitant to talk to him outside of class. One day, he and a few friends were on a road trip through Illinois, I believe. He was driving when the friend behind him started gasping and making choking noises. He slammed on the brakes, and he claims they believed the friend came back to his senses. Still, they got freaked out and carried him to a parking lot behind a Kmart, thinking he could walk it off once he felt better. Fast forward 2 days, and the professor is driving his mom around that area and passes the Kmart, only to see his friend lying in the exact same spot. He said all he could think was, "Shit, man." That's basically how he ended the story, and the whole class went dead silent. That was 2 years ago, and he's been fired since, for canceling class constantly and not actually teaching. Story 42. It's not all that dark, but racism ended a friendship of mine. My husband and I were hanging out with another couple we'd been friends with for years. They'd been living in their home for about a year, and we were talking about their neighborhood. They commented that it used to be nice, but lately a lot of people from a certain Toronto suburb had been moving in, so the neighborhood had gone downhill. At first we weren't sure what they meant, but then they clarified, "It smells like curry in the mornings." That's when it clicked. The suburb in question has a large population of visible minorities. They were upset that their white-bread commuter town was becoming more ethnically diverse. My husband and I are known to make off-color jokes and sometimes engage in harmless stereotyping, but it's always been in jest. We don't dislike minorities. We love our multicultural urban neighborhood. Somehow, this kind of casual, serious racism crossed a line. We haven't seen these people since that conversation. Story 43. I dated a guy who rarely told me anything about his life. He had no Facebook, and his Instagram was private. He had only introduced me to one long-term friend when she visited from his hometown. She got drunk and told me how chaotic his life had been. moving to a new city every year, but she was happy he seemed stable then. I guess she assumed he had already told me all this. Eventually, all the secrets started to scare me, and I broke up with him. He moved away a month later. Recently, I found out he was running from his crazy ex-boyfriend with help from a coworker. The ex had even come to his job looking for him. I feel so bad for leaving him, and now I just wish I could help him. Story 44. On a throwaway for this one, since I have two stories. First one, I met a girl over the summer who's pretty popular in my LGBT community. I hit it off with her. She had a great sense of humor, was smart, witty, the kind of person who naturally draws attention in a room. She also had a rough life story, and I felt a lot of empathy for her. She'd been in the army, experienced a difficult family situation, faced essay, and had always felt kind of lost, only recently finding a sense of home in our community. I really respected her for that. Shortly after I met her, I learned from a couple of close friends that she had made up a significant portion of her life story. She has deceived multiple people. No one really believes it because she's so charming, and even though she admits to doing something wrong and feeling guilty, she constantly makes excuses. She says things like she gets caught up in the moment, that people are using her past to target her, that it wasn't really as bad as people say, or that she's being made out to be the villain. It's classic Darvo. Every time I think of her now, I get chills. Second one of my friends, let's call her X, was sharing an apartment with another friend of mine. X and Y were very codependent, both having had bad experiences with people they trusted. Y, in particular, is known for lashing out, trolling online, and being generally harsh. I really liked Y at the time because she was friendly toward me. She helped me when my family failed me and I had to start working just to get by. She even sent me a bunch of gifts for Christmas. She treated me with respect, and that meant a lot because I wasn't getting much of that in the rest of my life. It later came out that Y had a history of abusing and threatening X. On one occasion, Y even physically assaulted her. Y and I eventually grew apart, and a lot of that relationship haunts me, especially because I now realize that the care package, the respect, and the friendliness were all part of a larger pattern that could have ended with me in a similar situation. X and I are still friends, but she continues to stay in touch with Y, and they always end up coming back together. Story 45. I lost track of a friend while I was going through chemo. She basically avoided me like a jerk. After about a year, she reappeared, shocked that I had survived, and I was willing to let it go. A couple of months later, I tried to reach out to her again and couldn't get a hold of her. Then, about 2 years ago, she suddenly responded to a Facebook message. We talked a bit, and she told me she had spent a couple of years in jail on fraud charges. She wanted to rekindle our friendship, and I said no thanks. Something felt off about her trying to reconnect after all that. Story 46. I learned that 2 of my closest friends had been emotionally abusing another, less close friend of mine, and had been doing so for years. I almost didn't say anything. First, they had almost convinced me that she deserved it. And second, they had convinced me that she hated me. Eventually, I decided that whether she hated me or not, she deserved to know the truth. They hated me for confirming the suspicions she'd had for years, and were no longer friends. She didn't hate me, and never had. So, now we're really close. Story 47. My best friend got to know a girl from work who had come from a youth home and offered her a room in her apartment. The girl was troubled and went wild once she realized she didn't have to follow the rules of the home anymore. That's one thing. She was learning life. But she quickly started going downhill, becoming horribly boy crazy. My friend did everything she could to help. One day, the girl revealed she had been essayed by a few guys at the local park. My friend convinced her to go to the hospital for testing, but the cops didn't want to get involved. It turned out one of the guys had given her chlamydia. We were all broken up about it. About a week later, my friend, annoyed that the girl was still friends with one of the guys who essayed her, went through her phone. She found texts from the girl to this guy, claiming she wanted to be with him, that she knew he loved her, and that she thought he wanted to get with her and marry her. We both realized we needed to wash our hands of the situation, especially after my friend discovered that the girl had been letting guys into the apartment without permission, which was a huge no-no we had agreed on beforehand. My friend is hearing impaired, and there's a back door in the girl's room. After a huge fight, during which the girl even got the sheriff involved citing squatters' rights, she ended up leaving anyway. Story 48. I had to break up with my ex-boyfriend and his entire family. There was so much wrong, I don't even know where to start. They weren't exactly bad people, but they weren't really on the good side of the fence either. I saw his entire family, multiple times, pull younger members back into toxic situations just as they were trying to move forward in life. Graduated from high school with college credits and spent the last 3 years taking AP courses. Why do that when you can sit at home with crappy people and ignore your homework? Want to go to college out of state? Don't do that. You'll be far from home, and your family will miss you. Better stay home. One of his cousins was also almost registered as an S offender. The cousin was 18, the girl was 18, and everything was reportedly consensual. The cousin served some jail time, but got off the hook. He tried to rebuild his life, but it didn't work out, and he ended up getting back together with the girl he had been sent to jail over. I also witnessed multiple instances of animal and child abuse, including neglect. One dog was locked outside, tied to a tree, all day, every day. His cousins even thought it would be funny to go out and shoot my cats when I gave them to a farm. They didn't find them, thankfully, but it really pissed me off. Threats were exchanged, and I swore I would go to jail before letting them touch my animals. I later learned that, because of something my mother had done, my ex's family wanted to beat me up as revenge, even though I had nothing to do with the incident. It was a horrible environment. Now that I think about it, they were very mean-spirited people and family. Story 49. My best friend Shane became friends with this girl, and I became friends with her too. We'd hang out and chill. Shane and I were looking for a place to live and decided to invite her to move in with us. One day we were driving to get some food, and I pointed out a guy with a big nose in the car next to us. We laughed, but then she started going on about how he was probably Jewish because of his nose, and how all Jews have big noses and gross, stringy hair. She even mentioned that Shane's stepfather, who had essayed him as a kid, was obviously Jewish, and that she wasn't surprised. Shane and I laughed nervously, not sure what else to do. We got our food and had a fine time, but the minute I dropped her back off at home, Shane and I were like, what the hell? We agreed immediately that she was absolutely not moving in with us. Story 50. I had a friend who constantly drove like a maniac. He claimed he had super reflexes, but I kept telling him, one day you'll encounter someone who makes a mistake, and your reflexes will be worth nothing. At some point, I was chatting with an old friend of his who no longer talked to him. She told me that some years before, he'd been in a serious accident. He wouldn't give out any details, but he'd lost his license for 5 years, and she believed he had either seriously injured or killed someone. That was basically it. We had one argument about another unrelated issue, an a-hole thing he was doing. I didn't tell him what I knew because it had been shared in confidence. I just walked out of the bar we were in and never spoke to him again. She's still a friend 20 years later, by the way, and she's never lied about anything. Story 51. Not a story that ended. Not a story that, with an instant breakup, but it probably should have. I was dating a guy named Jay, at least that's the name I'll use, and we met through a mutual friend. We hit it off in a strange but intense way. He claimed to have a strained relationship with his homophobic father. One day, I went to his house. He lived in a beautiful home, with a pool, a pinball machine, a pool table, exquisite decor, and plenty of space. Basically, he was rich. I was 18, just out of high school. He was 21, had no job, a car his dad gave him, and was about to be kicked out. Naive as I was, I let him move in with me until he could find somewhere else, at the expense of my father and me. One night, while we were getting intimate, I had my head near his hips when he suddenly started crying, bawling almost. I pulled back and cuddled him, asking what was wrong. He said he'd just had a falling out with his dad and had moved in with me. And then he said, I hate my dad so much, I just want him to pass away so I can collect an insurance check. He never did anything for me. I just sat there, completely boggled. I still tried to console him, even though something in me knew it was wrong. I had always held a certain prejudice against rich kids, and in that moment, he confirmed every ugly stereotype I'd ever had. After that, the relationship slowly fell apart. Things became strained. I helped him get a job at Starbucks, and not long after, he moved out. He ended up moving in with the same mutual friend who had introduced us in the first place. 2 weeks later, he broke up with me. Story 52. I never learned any specific dark secret about a friend of mine, but she often claimed she had done terrible things in the past, though she never elaborated. Her sense of humor was morbid, and she was interested in gore and other disturbing topics. So it was possible she was joking, but the constant insistence that she was a horrible person started to get on my nerves. She also had strange behavior, like completely changing her personality and manner of speaking, depending on who she was interacting with. I know everyone does this sometimes, but I wasn't the only one who found it odd in her case. At some point, I started to wonder if she was joking at all. Eventually, I couldn't interact with her without getting a weird, uneasy feeling in my stomach, so I cut off all contact without explaining myself. We weren't very close anyway. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.